Welcome to Lean RPA Principles and Practice. This is Chapter 10, our closeout, by Rob King. Looking back across the course, we've covered a lot of topics. We started out by setting some objectives and understanding why we believe there's a need for both Lean and RPA in combination. And we looked at a bit of the history of automation and Lean and the current state of the market, before dipping into some of the frameworks that will help you communicate to both stakeholders and customers. We looked at the elephant in the room, how you handle the situation with regards to your people, and communication an essential component of that. And then started in terms of getting started. We looked at the Lean RPA game plan and some of the key skills that you're going to need for driving forward your RPA program. We spent an entire chapter looking at lean thinking for RPA, drilling into detail into the 7 types of waste to understand how you can optimize your processes for automation. Before moving on to looking at piloting and some of the most crucial tools that you're going to be using throughout the remainder of your program to document and optimize your processes prior to automation. We then spent our longest chapter looking at 3 different tools. First of all, starting with a little bit of a primer on how Windows applications work and how modern day automation programs work, before building 3 applications using 3 different tools to compare and contrast the difference of approaches. Last time we looked at operationalization, how you combine strategy, tactics and operations and build a centre of excellence that's fit for purpose for your organisation. We've now reached our final chapter, which will start by looking at some of the challenges we face and how Lean RPA can help you to address those challenges. We'll look at the benefits of Lean RPA and also look at the topic of innovation versus improvement. We'll then bring together some related topics such as BPM, RPA, AI and Lean together to understand how they all can fit together in a single model. Finally, we'll close with some opportunities for further development in the future. There are many challenges and pitfalls that you'll face throughout your automation journey. Here are a few that we've uncovered as we've spoken to people and other organisations throughout our careers. One of the first challenges that we hear about is the challenge of moving beyond the pilot. This is a challenge typically of scale and scaling up. The many advantages of a pilot are that you can simplify many of the factors that you need to engage, because you're there to learn lessons, understand some of the structures that you're going to need in the future, but in a very small and controlled area. Putting those lessons learned into practice is a big challenge and requires a dedication of staff and resources, a dedication of new processes, a dedication of new operating models and organisation structures. And even on the technology side, there is going to be more challenges to operate the technology at a greater scale. All of these factors need to be considered and implemented. Rather than is often the perception, the pilot worked, let's just keep doing what we've done. Which, to be fair, will get you a little way further forward, but will eventually introduce the challenge of scaling up. There's a second challenge that we encounter, which is organisations that haven't fully evaluated their vendor prior to operating, and they've found the vendor to be perfectly fit for the pilot, but then struggled to be able to afford the costs of scaling. And this is one of the challenges of simply jumping in to the vendor without considering your own business needs. and the fit with the business and skills that you have available. So the solution to this is largely the topics we covered in Chapter 9, which was the operations of strategy, tactics and operations, and how you build your Centre of Excellence. The second challenge that we see is that of adoption. And this was certainly a challenge that we faced many times in the early days of automation. This is a challenge of culture. And the challenges of culture are as long as they are short. In the early days, the challenge was quite often about communication and being able to translate what automation really meant. These days, the challenge is that plus the myths and challenges that you face from the press. The more and more people fear automation, and actually the culture is against it before you've even begun. There are many things that you can do to help address the challenges of culture. Most of the tactics we've talked about throughout this entire course have been about people and how you can increase their engagement and understanding of, first of all, what automation is and what it can do. And then to think about communicating right from the very start, how that will affect the organisation and the people in the long term. Being open and honest and having plans for your people will help to address many of the concerns. But it's also about engagement and empowerment and ways of working as you drive your program forward. If you already have an innovative and empowered culture, then the fit is going to be quite good. But if your typical structure and culture is more of a command and control, or even a parental structure, which we've seen in other organisations, where employees are literally spoon-fed everything along the way, these are not good immediate fits and will need a lot of effort to help people understand their place in the organisation as they move forward. So the challenge of culture really comes back down to how you communicate to your people and setting out clear plans to make sure they understand their place in the future. There are likely many activities going on within the organisation, from simple to day-to-day activities, or not so simple day-to-day activities, through to strategic initiatives, technology replacements and other projects. The challenge of business change begins with one of prioritisation. And this comes back a little to what we talked about when we talked about Hoshin Kanri. What are the vital few activities that the organisation needs to address as part of their strategy? And therefore, how, first of all, does this fit into the overall strategy? The second component, then, of business change is one of skills, giving people the right skills to be able to progress and implement an automation program. We very much support collaborative working. That's not just agile working, but simply working together in teams, which mixes up both business skills, technical skills, and other skills necessary to implement in this particular area that you're talking about. That could be marketing, finance, etc. The challenge of change control is slightly different. That's something about governance. This is more about focusing on your people and motivations. And what are the measures that will help to drive those motivations forward? Remember the old adage that what gets measured gets done, but also you've got to find the right measures that will actually drive the right behaviours. So the challenge of business change follows very closely from the challenge of culture, because it comes down to one of behaviours and supporting and driving the right behaviours to encourage a faster pace of change within the organisation. Which leads neatly to accelerating RPA. Again, very similar to the topic of the challenge of scale, this is the challenge of adopting the right business model. The business model starts perhaps with your discussion about centres of excellence. Which is the right approach for you? Is it a centralised? Is it a federated? Or more likely, is it a hybrid approach? But as we discussed at the time, even the hybrid approach has many nuances in terms of the level of that hybridization. Organizations simply cannot assume that their existing business model and goals will work the same when adopting automation. Even supporting shared service functions are going to change significantly. The role of HR, for example, is going to be significantly impacted. And the discussion of where automation sits within the organization can be a big debate. Something that we've seen through many organizations' implementation of RPA is that sitting it within the business seems to be the right place. Automation is more akin to managing other humans than it is to managing pieces of software. And therefore the skills that you need to maintain a fleet of robots is more akin to maintaining your normal staffing, and has many of the same challenges. Remember, we talked about pioneering and sustaining. The pioneering phase is about learning. It's about going and facing new challenges, trying new ideas, and identifying the things that are going to work for you. The next component, though, was then sustaining, and this is where accelerating RPA fits. Accelerating RPA means taking all the lessons learned from your pioneering phase and now helping to apply them across the entire organization. Looking at all of the topics on this slide, that fits closely to the subject of sustaining, which was all about adoption, acceleration, and continuous improvement. And to drive those three things is all about giving your people the right skills, the right vision, and the right motivation. Documentation and standardization gives us the challenge of lost knowledge. Inevitably, as you automate different processes, people will move on. Some will move on and further their careers within the organization, or move across the organization into other areas. Others will leave the organization entirely. But over time, the greatest fear is the loss of knowledge. And that is certainly one of the big risks. The way that we face that risk head on with Lean RPA is in the level of documentation that we produce. At a strategic level, we identify clear purpose, customers and goals, and customer value. At an individual process level, we understand the value stream maps, the steps required to deliver value to the customer. And then at a lower level of detail, we understand how we deliver that in terms of the individual steps that we go through. And we document to a slightly lower level if needed to be able to relate that to systems and interfaces. All of this gives us the information that we need to make sure that we understand the purpose, goals, and process steps that we undertake to deliver value to our customer. It's also incumbent on all the people involved in automation to be able to maintain that documentation too. So keeping a central repository that is easy and well maintained is essential. Putting all these components in place will ensure that you face head on the challenge of lost knowledge. Governance and control. This is the challenge of change management. Change management at the moment is a hot topic within the topic of automation. primarily because there is a feeling that insufficient change management is being applied to some programs, and this is leading to increased failure, particularly at the piloting stage. Creating a centre of excellence has always for us been about finding the right balance between control and flexibility, the ability to be able to still be nimble and rapid within the delivery framework while providing the right level of appropriate protection to the types of processes that we're undertaking. Organisations that look upon their robotic workforce in the same way as they look upon their staff, that occasionally things go wrong and they need to make corrections when that happens, is a more healthy view than perhaps expecting everything to work 100% all of the time, and then layering on excessive layers of governance when that should happen. Automation is automation with a human touch, stopping at any abnormality and handing control back to humans. Our goal is always to build systems that do exactly that, that if any anomaly is identified, then it reverts back to human control. Over time, those elements of human control will slowly be eliminated and automated. So you can begin your automation journey on simple tasks that are clearly task-based, the low-hanging fruit that can be automated simply with a high level of confidence, and then build up the level of automation as your skills improve. But change management is still an essential component of all of your programs. This is a slide that's been around for many a year. This part of the slide is purely a lean slide and helps us to demonstrate what we typically see when we start to apply lean thinking to a process. We look at a process, the blue line, and that's the timeline from beginning to end of a piece of work as it goes through a process. The red blobs then are the value-added work that's completed throughout that timeline. Quite often you see large pieces of wait time, and this is all a waste. So one of the first things that we are able to see is a compression of that timeline. And even the value-added tasks are made more efficient. Lean thinking helps us eliminate the waste, which is largely in the blue areas of this timeline. Automation, though, allows us to improve the value add, the work time within the process, reducing that time, which is something that is historically a big challenge for RPA, for lean thinking projects. So what do we see when we implement lean and RPA in conjunction? First of all, the purely lean elements, we see cost reducing, we see the number of defects reducing, we see the lead time for activity to complete reducing, we see inventory or work in progress as another measure reducing, we see the amount of physical space required reducing, and of course a key component of lean is the elimination of waste. In parallel to this, we're seeing lots of things increasing. And the first of that list I've put is automation, which is automation with human intelligence. By this, we're not referring to artificial intelligence or something very futuristic. We're simply talking about doing well the mundane processes, but handing back to a human when necessary. So the level of automation helps us to compress the value-added time in ways that have never been possible and available to us before. Alongside that, we see productivity increasing, and because we're focusing on customer value, we see customer satisfaction increasing. We often see employee satisfaction increase. This is a twofold story. First of all, we're taking away wasteful activity and focusing more on the value, which is always a positive. But second, we're also empowering them to continue to improve. There are always going to be people left in the process, whether they're in the automation teams or whether they're still in the business teams. And empowering those people to be able to continually improve and drive further levels of benefits is a key component of applying Lean and RPA in combination. Of course, this reduction in overall time frame and compression of time also improves cash flow, and this should translate into profit. It's also responsiveness to the customer, providing the information at the point of need when it's needed. Of course, capacity, the ability to do more, and quality, getting it right, increases. And this increases the probability of on-time delivery, getting the word to the customer when necessary. Overall, it is doing the same work, the same outcomes typically, but we're now completing it in less time. Staying on the benefits of Lean RPA then, is that Lean RPA gives you a structured approach and a level of thinking. Remember the comment, it's the principles to keep you there and the tools to get you there. The two work in combination. So we've looked at a number of tools and techniques that provide a structured approach to documenting and delivering your program of work. But it also gives you a way of thinking to ensure that you maintain a high standard of work always going forward. It provides a repeatable standard with continuous learning built in. Lean thinking is often referred to as a learning system because it continues to adapt to new technologies and new ways of thinking and new methodologies as people become more aware of those opportunities. It believes in innovation and experimentation, so trying new things to be able to work out what is the best way forward. It doesn't simply look for a common best practice and use that best practice. It's always looking for what is the next thing that can help to improve. It also reduces risk. We've talked about this many times throughout, but it gives you a level of confidence and documentation necessary for repeatability and flexibility going forward. And of course, it is a very collaborative discussion-based approach. It doesn't work as a waterfall style project because it is often the discussion of ideas and collaboration that drives the best results. As a facilitator, I often refer to people to actually say there's no such a thing as a bad idea. And some people think this is crazy, but it's quite often the crazy ideas that lead to something that is unique, achievable, and very different to the way things are working today. It prompts the discussion in others, and this is where collaboration really drives the very best results. It is efficient and effective. An ongoing debate in many subject areas. This is about doing things right and doing the right thing. These two things work closely in combination because we've seen very efficient processes that were simply unnecessary. So they were efficient, but not very effective. And this is where lean thinking and the topics of waste first help. They help us think about how we do things efficiently, but also question exactly what is the value and how effective are they. And this can sometimes come down to prioritization. So within your own program, you have the question of how efficient is the program and how effective is the program. Well, we've seen organizations that have gone on significant journeys of documenting all of their processes, before starting the topic of automation. This is wasting time. There is a minimum amount that you need to do to be able to get started effectively. And we discussed this somewhat when we talked about the pipeline and the funnel for prioritizing processes. And we identified that funnel as a way to fast path even through to the right solutions and the right processes to be automating. This is about being both efficient and effective without excessive waste, waiting for everything to be documented before you make your first decision. Of course, we talked a little too about this topic. It's about being valuable, adding value at every step of your journey, but creating repeatable and flexible processes. And this is perhaps sometimes the difference between the pioneering phase and the sustaining phase. During the pioneering phase, your processes may not be the most repeatable or most flexible. You're just trying something out to see if it will work. But if it does work, then you can now assimilate that into the whole to try and figure out what you need to do then to make it valuable, repeatable and flexible. To be effective, everybody in the organization needs to be able to take advantage of the lessons learned during the pioneering phase. So making it clear, making the positive lessons and some of the negative lessons clearly understood so that you can repeat the process ongoing. Which leads neatly to the next topic, which is focusing on people and cultural change. Many automation programs can begin with a key focus on technology. And that's not surprising. But actually, when you look across the many technologies available, the biggest challenge is rarely the technology itself, but rather the adoption by the people. So actually focusing on people and culture as well as the technology is a key component of any program. This reminds me pretty much of two different little sayings. First of all, is people, process, technology. One of the challenges we always face is to consider what is the effect on all of those three. But also from a lean perspective, lean added customer to that list. Do you remember customer, people, process was the starting point for one of our discussions? So again, it's the combination of what is value for the customer, how does that translate to empowering our people, having efficient and effective processes underpinned by the right level of technologies. Increasingly, the hybrid skills of people with both business and technology skills is going to be increasingly in demand. Developing the operating model will allow you to scale and sustain. There are a variety of approaches to generating an operating model, but all of them contain some of the same components, which is having a clear purpose, understanding your customers and channels, and having a clear set of goals and vision for where you're trying to get to. Having a focus on people, process and technology to underpin that. And of course, how you translate that vision through middle management and operational staff to ensure that everybody is heading in the same direction. People and resource will typically focus on developing skills from within. This gives you your strong business focus from the very start. But it's also important perhaps to bring in key skills from outside, especially if you want to teach new ways of thinking and new ways of working. It's hard to change a culture when nobody in the team knows exactly what that new culture is supposed to look like. So bringing in people who do know what that new culture will look like because they've seen it and maybe in other organizations, then they can help to teach the others. Focusing specifically then on the additional benefits that automation brings to your Lean RPA program is they remove repetitive tasks. They reduce risk and improve efficiency. And of course, they handle peaks and troughs of volume, allowing you to be always available. Having been involved in process improvement and continuous improvement for a number of years, it's interesting to see how some of this information is being recycled around at the moment and being rebranded as innovation. Improvement is not innovation. And I'll put this slide in really to help to sort of explain why I believe that. Because improvement, as we've seen, is about continuous improvement. It's usually about evolution. Whereas innovation tends to be more revolutionary, something completely different. We often talk about innovation in terms of disruptive innovation. That is revolution, not a simple evolution. Another way to describe improvement is an advance on a prior state in excellence or achievement. This is a definition we often use when trying to help people understand how to implement continuous improvement. So it's something you know about already, and you're now taking the next step forward in improving and striving for that perfection. However, innovation is quite often something completely new or completely different. We often put improvement plans in place because we've fallen behind for some reason, say with the general market. So improvement is catching up with what other people are doing. Innovation, on the other hand, is creating something new or different. Therefore, it could be creating an entirely new market. Improvement, because of its incremental approach, often does not significantly differentiate you from your competitors. Now, sometimes we do see a level of efficiency gained that does significantly differentiate you from your competitors. So it can happen. But if we follow the 80-20 rule, most of the time it's usually an evolution of one step to the next. And here's the rub. For me, this is a great definition of something that is innovative. It's a unique outcome that competitors are unwilling or unable to match. Think of Amazon for a moment. It puts in processes that are simply so unique to the organization that competitors are unable to match them. This is a great example of some of the innovation that went behind driving Amazon's name forward. Sometimes though, when we look at an improvement project, we do see there is a need for innovation. And so quite often the problems that we face can sometimes be a catalyst for driving more innovative solutions. And quite often, innovation does include improvement opportunities. When stabilizing and standardizing innovative new ideas, some of those improvement concepts are still crucial to making sure that you have a stable, flexible, and valuable future state. Both improvement and innovation, though, are underpinned by very similar sets of skills. Empowered people, knowledgeable people, people that facilitate and drive activities in a collaborative way, and people who work closely with customers to understand what is value and what is needed within the market. There are some different terms being bandied around at the moment for robotic process automation. Sometimes we talk about RPA, sometimes we talk about intelligent automation, and sometimes we talk about digital process automation. And these are actually, I believe, a natural evolution of how we've come to understand how automation works. So over the next few slides, I'm going to put these components together to explain the differences between these three different things. I'm going to start with robotic process automation, though in this context, it's automation of any type. Remember when we talked about lean thinking, we talked about customer, people, and process. And a lot of that is about strategic and organizational thinking. And at the process level, it becomes more about operational thinking. Customer, people and process, for me, sits ahead of RPA because it gives you the context in which automation can occur to make sure you're automating the right thing and you're automating an efficient and optimized process. RPA then is an operational tool and sits above your systems, your technology. Your technology systems, often referred to as your core applications. So RPA is often a veneer that sits across the top. Now, before we start looking at what is intelligent automation, we need to introduce a couple of extra concepts. So we spent a lot of time looking at automation, and there's two factors that make a process ideal for automation. First of all, it's a structured process that's easily defined and well understood. And second, it contains data in a structured format. When you receive information in emails or via written documents or even sort of different spreadsheets, then that's unstructured data and not a good solution necessarily for RPA. So RPA works very well when you've got a lot of structure. For many years, there has been BPM, Business Process Management. Business Process Management is structured work orchestration. It helps to define processes and steps within the process and helps to navigate and prioritize that work to individuals. There's always been a link between BPM and RPA, and that link is there for many reasons. First of all, organizations that have implemented BPM have typically also implemented a methodology of some kind to optimize their processes. So they tend to have well-structured processes. Even if they haven't applied continuous improvement, they at least have well-documented processes. And this definitely helps when implementing RPA. In the future, I think the link between BPM and RPA will start to blur, because there will be less need for BPM in the classic sense, but there will always be a need for work orchestration and orchestrating that work between both humans and robots. There's a further concept that you can't have failed to hear something about, certainly in the press, because the topic of AI or artificial intelligence is always being mentioned right now and is billed to be the next big thing. And AI definitely has a strong link to RPA, because AI can deal with the two things that RPA struggles with the most. AI can handle unstructured processes and unstructured data. So if you are getting your messages in via weighty documents or emails, and you have to decipher it all to figure out what needs to be done, then AI, or some of the components of AI, is there to help you understand that. AI is also better able to deal with unstructured processes, processes that don't have a clear start and stop point. What AI can do, of course, is understand those unstructured processes and that unstructured data and provide it with some structure. And that's where the link between RPA and AI can become crucially strong. In practice, there's a lot going on in this space already. Well, I'm referring to AI in this context in the broadest sense. To avoid any debate later on, largely what this is machine learning. It's taking information and learning, typically by a human, telling the machine exactly what it's seeing. And the machine learns over time exactly what's going on. In the last few years, you can't help but notice just how much things have advanced. And you can't help but open the papers and read something more about AI or machine learning. And for me, it fits into three big categories. First, you've got opportunities for automation. And we're seeing that already with the ability for machine learning to understand legal documents and identify when there is an anomaly. or even sports statistics, which are now produced automatically by a machine learning algorithm. Each of these machine learning algorithms isn't exactly data or the Terminator. They're simply focused on a specific task and do that task very well, such as the evaluation of legal documents or the generation of sports statistics. What this opens up is an opportunity to provide much more tailored services to individuals. It wasn't physically possible to generate tailored sports statistics just to your specific interests. But now, when these statistics are produced to the lowest level of detail, you can now tailor what you need specifically to your interests. We then have AI that augments. And here we see things like natural language to be helping to drive changes. Of course, we've all been using Siri, Alexa, and other tools. Chatbots and virtual agents are understanding very natural language conversation. So AI is able to turn a very natural language discussion into structured information about a process, for example, that needs to be completed. We can also see this happening over the telephone. So we're having a natural language conversation with an AI at the other side. Sometimes the one thing that is described as really differentiating artificial intelligence is the ability for self-learning, being able to do things better the more it does. And we're seeing that type of activity now with things like the driverless car. This is the disruptive end of AI, and certainly something that's not going to be mainstream for a little while. But the techniques that are being applied will drive down throughout the whole essence of what's possible from artificial intelligence and machine learning. So how does this fit with the model that we was looking at earlier? So this is a model for intelligent automation. And it's similar to what we saw before with the lean-based thinking of customer, people, process driving value, with the underlying technology systems, and with automation, both attended and unattended, sitting atop of those systems and delivering robotic process automation out to the customers. Machine learning is now being used to drive more and more activity into that automation by taking unstructured data, creating some structure from it, and now triggering processes. So intelligent automation, to begin with, is starting to take unstructured data, making it structured for us to be able to automate. But machine learning is doing more than just that. It is also replacing some of those technology systems by becoming a knowledge base and a repository of information that can be then applied to not only directly to automation, but directly to customers through things such as chatbots, for example. There has often been a debate that the word robotic in robotic process automation conjures up all of the wrong imagery. And it's certainly true. Some of the myths that you face when first dealing with people who haven't seen any automation are far and wide. And it's certainly probably the word robot in there that drives some of that thinking. So another term that's being used is that of digital process automation. And digital process automation is now combining the three key elements that we see now in the automation space. The combination of automation, both attended and unattended, with machine learning, with the data and intelligence that's being generated, because these processes and machine learning techniques are driving more and more data from which we can both learn and drive more efficient processes. So digital process automation still focuses on the strategic with customers and our people and empowerment. It also focuses on the operational with processes and still has the same underlying systems of record driving some of these core processes underneath. But in the middle, we have business intelligence and data repositories driving automation and machine learning, ever increasing the capabilities of what's possible. I can't believe it, but I've reached the end of the core materials for this course. Whenever looking at a process, you often look at it from three perspectives. You look at it from the perspective of how is that process created, the perspective of how it is used, and eventually how is that process terminated. And the same will be true of your robots. As you build your automation workforce, eventually there will be robots or automations, we should say, that are no longer needed, and you will need a process for archiving those automations off. Which brings us to our closing summary for Lean RPA. If you are interested in further consulting, coaching, or tailored training, then the RPA Academy and Wizard Innovation can both help you, so please do get in touch. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about Lean Six Sigma and the topics we've discussed today, then there are a few books that will help you further that education. I've already mentioned the Lean Startup, and that's recently been followed up by The Startup Way, both by Eric Rice. The Goldmine is a novel, but applies all of the lean thinking into a real world scenario. So it's another way to learn more about lean in perhaps a more entertaining format. The Toyota Way is a series of books that have documented the Toyota processes from culture to leadership. And the book Toyota Way to Lean Leadership by Jeffrey Leica is one of the more important ones. But do also check out other books like Toyota Culture. We've mentioned Dan Jones and Jim Womack and their breakout book, Lean Thinking, which really kicked this all off back in '96. And if you prefer a little more lightweight version, there is a pocket toolbook that can help you just learn some of the key tools and techniques. You can't help but look on Google and see millions of books now on the topic of Lean Six Sigma. Less though on the topic of automation. And that's something I think we'll see change. To close out, I'll just do a quick recap on our final segment, which really focused on continuous automation, which was the topics of scaling and sustaining your automation program. Over this third segment of learning, we've covered the topics of Lean, such as Hoshinkanri, which is about strategy and deployment. We've looked at Kaizen or continuous improvement, and we've looked at the different operating models, particularly around the Center of Excellence. And we've looked at the benefits you can achieve by combining Lean and Six Sigma. From an automation perspective, we've started to differentiate now between physical objects or the underlying systems, the business entities or logical entities which can help you to document and reuse different new components in your automation. We've looked at creating new presentation layers for automation, for how you interact with that automation, be that at the desktop or via back office unattended. And we've looked at how you generate the business logic and how this relates directly to a number of the tools and techniques that we use to document processes. And we've focused in a little bit more detail on some vendor examples and the differences between them that you need to align to your own businesses to find which is the best fit. And finally, we looked at how BPM, Lean, RPA and AI all combine to be able to provide a model which is called digital process automation. Our automation delivery lifecycle has something we've been working through since chapter 1. And in the last few chapters, we've of course focused more on the closure of your pilot and moving into building your Center of Excellence. And that has started with the very first step of agreeing a strategic rollout following the end of a successful pilot, feeding back the lessons learned and how automation will best fit within your organization and how this will inform corporate strategy, mid-level tactics and operational activities throughout the entire organization. We looked at how you prioritize your backlog, implementing the prioritization funnel we discussed, but now combined with a lot of the lean techniques to document the processes now on an ongoing basis to the level necessary, so the next highest priority you take out of the hopper for development for automation also contains all the required information you need in terms of the value, the process, and the steps required. Designing and implementing an operating model is a long-term plan, and this is going to require some thinking about which is the right model to fit your organization, and there may be transition stages. Your starting point is often an evolutionary approach. You just fall into it because you start the automation program. But eventually you reach a point where you need to scale. And at the point you need to scale, you need to think about the operating model. And the starting point for that is likely to start to think about building a hybrid model of central responsibilities and local responsibilities. And you need to start to operationalize that model. And that operationalization will include things such as governance, but also in the long run will likely also include other factors such as business intelligence and artificial intelligence, because they are key components that all fit into the same automation family of activities, or digital process automation. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention at least one more time the topic of continuous improvement, that you need to put in place an ability for the system to self-learn and maintain and improve. So this is our automation delivery lifecycle. It's a simplified version to help you identify at a high level the key steps that you're going through, from initial insight through getting started to scaling and sustaining your innovation and automation practice. As we revisit the goals one final time, I'd prompt you to go back to the very first exercise that we looked at, when you looked at your expectations for the training. Match them up to what we laid out and what you expected. And again, we'd love to hear your feedback in terms of things that we might want to include in this training in the future. So we've covered lean and automation, why you might need it, who are the providers, and how do you select the right one. We've covered the 6 skills needed for a successful RPA, and we've looked at that both in the context of a pilot and in the context of a centre of excellence. Throughout this, it's all about communication to your people, to your customers, and to your stakeholders, and providing a simple mechanism and framework to help you do that. It's about understanding customer value, waste elimination, and continuous improvement, the key elements of lean, all underpinned, of course, by running this in collaborative teams. We looked at some automation concepts, some basic thinking in terms of how automation works within the Windows environment and some of the key components of that. And finally, we looked at moving beyond the pilot, how lean and RPA can be operationalized, but also how you can move that into sustaining and scaling your pilot for long-term success. And with that final thought, I'd like to thank you all for coming with me on this journey. I hope you found it useful and informative and insightful. Of course, we always welcome feedback, so please do post comments on the social forum at the RPA Academy or drop me an email. Thank you again, and I wish you all the very best of luck in all your lean and RPA exploits in the future.